video, I want to talk a little bit about proposal arguments. Now, proposal arguments, when we think about arguments, oftentimes proposals are the most common type of argument and the one you probably, think of. In some cases, they are more aggressive, right? So trying to tell people what they should do. But, at the heart of every proposal argument is a very simple kind of idea. And that's, as the chapter describes, right? This idea that A should do B because of C. So in other words, you have an audience that you're always talking to. So you're thinking about a particular audience and you want them to take some course of action, right? And then, because of C, so because of reasons, basically. So you have to be able to prove, not just convince your audience that you have a valid point, but you have to persuade them to take action. Now, you want to think about that because that's not always easy to do. When you're persuading somebody to take action, you're basically saying, hey, I need you to get up off your butt and do something here. Now, it's one thing to persuade, your friends to help you move to a new apartment, right? Probably can kind of entice them with pizza, and your, kind of use your friendship as a basis there to kind of get that help, right? So there's already trust there, right? The audience, in this case, your friends, and you already have a relationship, right? When you're thinking about an audience that maybe you don't have a direct relationship with, that's sometimes a difficult gap to work through, right? You got to really say, hey, people, here's why you should do this. And even if people, should do it, right? Even if it's a good argument and a strong argument, they may not always do that. So that's something you need to keep in mind, right? So as you're looking to make a proposal, you really want to think about how can I take action, right? So, as the chapter points out, there's 3 characteristics of proposal arguments, and that they're all kind of common sense, but they're pretty important, right? A proposal, obviously, it calls for change, right? You see something happening and you want to have your audience do something about it, right? Now, as I mentioned when I introduced the assignment, that doesn't always have to be a negative thing, right? A proposal is not always, here is this problematic thing, we need to fix it, right? A lot of times it is, but not always. It could also be, hey, look at this new interesting trend that's happening. We should look at that more, right? Has anybody thought about this new technology, right? We should think about kind of investing in it more and things like that. So I don't know if you've seen, there's this new kind of, it's a syringe full of little sponges. It looks really weird, but it's basically designed to help plug gunshot wounds, until medics and doctors can get to addressing the issue, right? And we've been dealing with gunshot wounds for hundreds of years, right? This is a new technology that kind of looks to be really promising. I think they started testing it out, right? So things like this are good things to see, right? And it may be that this technology, if successful, can be a kind of jumping off point. So proposals don't always have to be a problem you're fixing to. They can be kind of a positive trend, a really interesting new thing to be looking at that we should kind of say, hey, we should be building off of that moving forward. So much like they call for change, not surprisingly, they focus on the future, right? Because you can't change the past. So, there's nothing you can say that says, okay, go back in time and fix things, right? So obviously when you're calling for change, when you're calling for action, it has to be on what your audience can do with this issue moving forward. That's why for this assignment, when you're picking a topic, it needs to be something that hasn't been solved. If it's already been solved, there's no point in making that argument. So the last thing that a proposal argument has that's really important is it centers on audience. So as I've just been talking about, that shouldn't be a big surprise, but you really need to think about who your audience is and how you can get them to take action, right? So by really knowing your audience, by knowing what they're interested in, that's going to be really important. Talking to a bunch of senior citizens about why they should invest in public education may or may not be the strongest, argument you can make to that audience, right? I mean, they might be interested, but they might not have kids or they might not have grandkids, and so maybe not be as invested, right? But if you talk to parents directly about the education that their children are going to be getting and why it needs to be supported, right? You're probably going to have an audience that's more interested and invested in the issue. And so because knowing your audience, then you can hopefully figure out what's going to make them take action, right? What's going to persuade them to actually listen to you and take action. So, but to do that, there's some things you have to do, right? First, you have to define the problem, and that's where the causal argument part of this paper comes in, right? That's where you're laying the groundwork and you're making the case and say, hey, here's this issue. Here's the way I'm interpreting events. And this is, you know, these are the causes or the effects that are kind of, you know, here's what we need to fix, right? You have to prove to them that there's a problem in the first place, or an issue in the first place, right? And once you've done that, then you have to make a claim. You have to tell your audience, hey, here's what you need to be doing. But you can't just make that claim and say, hey, okay, you know, here it goes. This is magically going to fix things, right? Because we hear that all the time. A lot of times those claims that we hear don't really end up being that good, right? They don't really follow through on the promise. And so as you're defining your issue and you're really thinking about what is that course of action you want your audience to take, you've got to think about, you know, how can you get them to do that? So you got to make a strong claim, and you also have to prove to your audience that it works. So, you know, it's one thing to say, oh, if we all stopped using this, you know, going back to the example I used in the assignment video about cars, right? You know, if we all stop driving cars tomorrow, I think it'll be good, right? We don't know that, right? And it won't be good, right? We'll have a whole new set of problems that basically come up. And also, there's no real way for you to prove that, right? I mean, maybe you can do the science and say, hey, well, if we all stop driving cars tomorrow, here's how many less, you know, carbon dioxide emissions we'd be putting in the atmosphere, but you don't know necessarily all the other effects. And that's something that would have to happen on such a mass scale, you know, that it's pretty much, you know, highly improbable, if not possible, that something like that could happen. You know, so as you're thinking about that course of action you want your reader to take, you got to think about what is it that they can do that's going to work. All right. So when you watched the Apple a Day video for the causal arguments yesterday, right? One of the nice things about that video is they lay out a decent causal argument, but there's 3 different courses of action at the end of that video that the audience can take. So one is just on your own, a little bit healthier, right? You can kind of just make the decision to, I'm going to eat more fruits and vegetables. I'm going to support these types of farmers, things like that. The second option is that you can write your representative, right? You can congressman or woman, you know, write your senator, let them know you're passionate about the issue. And then the third is you can go to the website of the organization, the Union of Concerned Scientists, learn more about the issue, join their listserv, things like that. And what's nice about that is if you are, you know, if you're persuaded enough by their argument, it gives you a lot of different avenues into you know, doing something, taking some course of action, right? And so you can really choose what best fits for you. Maybe you're lazy and you just don't want to write your legislator, or maybe you care about this issue but you're not going to change your diet, right? So you don't have to do all these things, just you can find the one that works for you. And when you watch the John Oliver video for today too on net neutrality, right, pay attention at the end with his proposal, right? What is it that he lays out for his audience to do? And then, you know, how does that kind of build off the argument he's been making in that video? So the last thing, you know, you have to, not only do you have to prove that your solution works, but you have to make sure it's feasible, right? That it is something your audience can do. So today, Oliver net neutrality videos can be helpful in kind of modeling what is a feasible proposal. Because if your audience can't do it, or if it's very difficult, or if you say, oh, this will be something we should do over the next 15 years, that's a lot of work. And if you're talking to an average person saying, hey, I need you to kind of change your entire lifestyle for the next 15 years, and they don't really have any sort of reason for doing so, or kind of any, you know, confidence that doing this is going to pay back whatever you say it is, right? That's a challenge. So as you're thinking about this, you want to think about your proposal. And some of the research for this assignment will be about kind of proving to your audience that your proposal is going to work, right? The big thing, though, is to think small, right? So think short term. You can look at long term. You can, you know, say, hey, with whatever your issue is, here's what we can do in the next 5 to 10 years. That's fine too, right? But sometimes it's helpful to just say, well, here's what you can do right now, or in the next couple of months, here's what we can do on this issue, right? And that's going to be more feasible. It's, work for your reader to really kind of just say, hey, okay, I get that. You know, I mean, I can do that, right? I can write an email to my representative. I can kind of just stop doing this one thing. So that's really what you're doing with your proposal. So as you watch the other video today, the Cohen video, and you marvel at his magnificent beard, pay attention to what he's talking about with arguments, right? Because a lot of times right now we seem to be very divided in terms of our rhetoric and our opinions, but there's things that need to be done, things that continue to need to be done. And so, as he points out in that video, if we can get a little bit, away from the argument as war model, as he'll talk about, and think more about, what happens when we can make an argument about compromising or cooperating, right? How we can actually deal with this issue, right? So that's kind of what you're looking at, thinking about in terms of the proposal argument. So keep in mind as you're working on thinking about your topic and you start drafting your argument, like what is it you want your audience to do? You don't need to know exactly yet, but you should have some idea that you're going to be leading them to some course of action down the road. So, feel free if you have questions about how to structure your proposal or how to, find the research to support your proposal, things like that, to let me know, post in the discussion board. I'll be looking over those questions and check them out. So otherwise, make sure for today, you also get your topic paragraph posted. I'll be looking at those over the weekend and making sure that everybody has a good topic for this next paper and you're on the right track.